Let's just say this. When you put handcuffs on the wrong veteran, you might end up calling someone a lot higher up than your supervisor. You never know who's walking among you, who they used to be, or what kind of friends they still have. Stick around to the end, and let us know in the comments section below what you would have done if you were there that day. Nicholas Stradling didn't walk like a man afraid of time. He didn't shuffle or sag or droop the way people his age often did. He moved like he was conserving energy, like every step was intentional. He wasn't fast, but he wasn't slow either. If anything, he was silent. And silence, to those who don't know what it can contain, looks a lot like weakness. He held a worn leather wallet in one hand, a folded piece of paper in the other. Just 2 items. That's all he'd brought into the Patriot Federal Bank's branch on Tremont Avenue that morning. He didn't need more. The letter was official, stamped, signed. In fact, it was written by Elaine Barrett herself, the CEO of Patriot Federal. Not that anyone here would know that. They'd never met her. Nicholas had no interest in explaining himself. He hadn't come here to make a scene or demand respect. He just needed to authorize a check and withdraw some cash for the community center's heating fund. The money wasn't even for him. He wasn't trying to prove anything. But that's never how stories like this start, is it? Greg Tanners had been watching Nicholas from the moment he stepped through the door. His jaw clenched in quiet rhythm as he scrolled through his tablet, pretending to look busy. Tall, smug, and perpetually annoyed, Greg was the kind of man who turned mild authority into minor tyranny. Assistant branch manager, in his mind, meant gatekeeper to the kingdom. And today the kingdom didn't have room for this man in a scuffed field jacket and cracked glasses. Greg leaned toward the teller nearest him, a young woman named Rhea, and murmured just loud enough to be heard, "Keep an eye on that guy." "He looks off." Rhea hesitated, glancing toward Nicholas, who stood patiently in line, his hands folded, waiting. "He just looks old and polite." "Exactly," Greg said under his breath. "Too polite. Nobody acts like that unless they're hiding something." Rhea rolled her eyes discreetly and turned back to her screen. Nicholas stepped forward as the line moved. The paper he held had begun to crinkle at the edges from the pressure of his thumb, but he didn't fidget. He didn't sigh. He didn't pace. He just waited, like he'd been through longer lines in harder places, and he had. When he finally reached the counter, he greeted the teller with a gentle nod and placed the paper on the counter. "I was told I could process this here. It's for the heating fund under the Veteran Support Community Project. Funds are being held under temporary authorization through the CEO's approval." The teller took the letter and squinted at the logo. Her eyes darted from the page to the screen and then to Greg. "Just a moment, sir," she said. Greg didn't look up when she approached. "What is it?" I think this is some kind of direct authorization letter, but it's not in the usual system." Greg took the letter, skimmed it, then scoffed. "Are you kidding me? This is printed off a home printer. This is what he brought in? He's asking for a manager to verify?" "I am the manager," Greg said sharply, "and this is nonsense. Tell him to take it to the main office, or better yet, tell him to leave." "Greg, I don't think that's—" "I said tell him," he snapped. Rhea flinched, turned, and walked back toward Nicholas. He hadn't moved, just stood there, waiting for the verdict. She tried to explain gently. "Sir, my supervisor says this may need to be handled at the main location. I'm really sorry." Nicholas didn't interrupt. He just nodded and extended his hand for the letter. But Greg wasn't done. He walked out from behind the counter, holding the letter like it was soaked in something foul. "You think you can walk in here with a fake letter and we're just going to hand over bank funds to you?" His voice was louder now, sharp, attention-seeking. Nicholas blinked once. "I think you're making assumptions you'll regret." "Oh, you think so?" Greg stepped closer, now invading the personal space of a man twice as calm and twice as dangerous as he could ever understand. "Because what I think is that you're trying to scam us, and you know what? I'm done with scammers." He turned to another employee. "Call the police. Let's let them sort this guy out." Rhea froze. "Greg, he hasn't done anything." "I said call them." Nicholas didn't flinch. Not when the call was made, not when Greg puffed his chest, not when two uniformed officers arrived 7 minutes later and immediately took in the scene with the kind of judgment that comes too easy when you've been trained to assume. "Is this the man causing the disturbance?" Sergeant Don Myers asked, already reaching for his cuffs. "No disturbance," Nicholas said evenly, "just incompetence." Don's partner, Officer Nate Harper, hesitated. "Sir, do you have ID?" Nicholas reached slowly into his wallet and handed over an old but valid government-issued identification. Harper scanned it. His eyes lingered on the bottom corner. "Former Department of Defense, Tier 3 clearance," Harper muttered aloud. Greg scoffed. "Fake. Probably bought it online. They sell those." Sergeant Myers didn't bother to look. "Let's go, sir. You're trespassing and refusing to leave. That's grounds enough." Nicholas exhaled, a breath that held decades in it. He didn't argue, just looked Harper in the eye, nodded, and held out his wrists. They cuffed him. The room went still. No shouting, no resistance, just that uncomfortable, suffocating quiet that follows injustice. As they led Nicholas toward the door, Harper felt a pang in his gut. Something didn't feel right. Not the way this man moved, not the strange weight of the ID in his hand, not the way Greg seemed to smirk as if he'd just won a prize. Harper leaned toward Myers. "Maybe we should double-check." But Myers waved him off. "We'll verify at the station. Let the system sort it out." Nicholas said nothing. He walked out of the bank without protest, still calm, still silent, but somewhere in his expression, if anyone had looked close enough, was a question. Not, "Why is this happening?" but, "Are they ready for what happens next?" The door to the precinct slammed open with the kind of force that made every desk jockey look up from their terminals. Sergeant Myers walked in first, muttering something about sovereign citizen types, while Officer Nate Harper followed, a step slower, glancing back at the patrol car like he'd left something unfinished. And in between them, hands cuffed but head held high, walked Nicholas Stradling. He didn't drag his feet. He didn't glance around the station like it was foreign or fearsome. In fact, he looked like a man who had walked into much worse places with far fewer people on his side. "Put him in interrogation room B," Myers barked. "I'll run the paperwork. Probably some kind of grifter working off bad intel." Nate hesitated, then nodded. He led Nicholas past the main desk, through a hallway of buzzing fluorescents and peeling posters from a decade ago. The door to room B creaked open, and the cold steel of the chair scraped the floor as Nicholas took a seat, slow and measured. He placed his hands on the table, still cuffed, palms down. He didn't speak. "You need anything?" Nate asked, trying not to sound awkward. Nicholas raised one eyebrow, just slightly. Nate swallowed. "Water, something to eat?" "No," Nicholas said. His voice wasn't sharp. It was low, nearly serene. But it had weight, it had gravity. "But you should check that ID again." Nate nodded slowly, backing out of the room. He closed the door, but not all the way. Back at the front desk, Myers was thumbing in details on the old desktop computer, muttering. Blackmail, late 70s, possible forged documents, claims affiliation with the Department of Defense, which is laughable. "Sergeant," Nate said cautiously, "that ID wasn't fake, at least not any fake I've seen. There's embedded microprint and a level 3 hologram." "Kid," Myers snapped, "you ever actually seen a Tier 3 DOD credential before?" "No," Nate admitted. But. Exactly. You think scammers don't keep up with the times? They're printing deepfakes and security-grade phony cards now. Stop second-guessing every call. But he tried to cash a letter that wasn't even on a company header. It was signed by a CEO, Nate said, firmer this time. "Allegedly," Myers spat. "Listen, if you want to chase your tail, go verify it yourself. Meanwhile, I'll finish this arrest report before he disappears back into whatever fake name he came in with." Nate didn't answer. He just turned and walked out, pulling the ID from his pocket as he went. It felt strange, not cheap. Not like the laminated junk they picked off kids pretending to be 21. This card had age, where, a story. He typed the serial number into the terminal at his desk and waited. Invalid request. He blinked. Tried again. Access restricted. He leaned back in his chair. That doesn't make sense. Across the bullpen, the sound of a distant fax machine whined like a dying bird. Myers huffed, slamming his keyboard as the form auto-seized. Nate picked up the phone. Dispatch, can you put me through to base-level clearance verification for federal credentials? Yeah, DOD. I have a card here I can't verify through standard systems. There was a pause on the line. Then, please hold. It took exactly 7 minutes before he was transferred to a civilian voice that didn't give a name, just initials. Verification. Code ready? Badge number D7392 KVJ. Issued to a Nicholas Stradling. There was a silence. Not static, just absence. Then the voice returned. Where is he? Nate sat up straighter. At the station. We brought him in about 15 minutes ago. Why? You need to notify your commanding officer. Now. What? Tell him to clear the room. A federal team will be there in 20. Wait, what is he? Clear the room, the voice said again, slower this time. That man holds special intelligence override. You shouldn't have detained him at all. The line went dead. Nate stood, unsure whether to be scared or excited or both. He walked fast, but not running, to Myers, who was now arguing with someone from records over a misplaced transfer request. Sergeant Myers, I just spoke with Federal Verification about the ID. Myers didn't look up. Great. Let me guess. They want to fax over a real one, right? No. They said he holds special intelligence override. That made Myers pause. He tilted his head, eyes narrowing. That's not a real thing. They also said to clear the room. Right now, a team is coming. Dan scoffed. That's probably his scam. Did they ask for bank routing info, too? I'm serious, Sarge. The line was direct. The call transferred through 2 departments. They knew his name before I gave it. Now Myers did look up. There was a flicker of doubt in his eyes, quickly masked by bravado. Okay, so he's a retired Fed. Doesn't change the fact he forged bank paperwork. I don't think it was forged. Of course you don't, Myers snapped, because you're still green. But he didn't resume typing. He stared at the half-finished report. Then, as if against his better judgment, he picked up the phone. Yeah. Get Captain Denton down here and tell Johnson to secure interrogation room B. But do it quietly, no alarms. Nate glanced toward the hallway. Nicholas Stradling sat still in the room, not moving, not reacting, just waiting. Not passive, not idle. Waiting like a chess player who had made the first move 20 years ago and knew the next 5 were already decided. The front door buzzed open. Not the usual loud clank, but a soft magnetic release. Unmarked SUV. Blacked-out windows. 2 people exited. The woman in front moved like she'd never had to wait for clearance in her life. Slim, sharp suit, matte black, hair pulled back, lips tight. The man behind her was heavier set, carrying a briefcase and a tension that didn't seem to belong on anyone's shoulders. They didn't say a word as they entered. The desk officer stood up, confused. Can I help? The woman flashed a badge. Not a badge, really. A credential. Gold-etched laminate with a stamp Nicholas would recognize by touch alone. We're here for Nicholas Stradling. Captain Denton appeared from his office just as Myers stepped forward. Hold on, who exactly are you? Denton asked. The woman answered without blinking. CIA, Internal Operations Division. The what now? The man behind her spoke, calm and slow. We'll be taking Mr. Stradling into protective transport. This station is now under a temporary federal hold. No one in or out. Ayers balked. Wait. What do you mean, protective? He's the one who got himself arrested. He walked into a bank with a fake letter. The woman looked at him like he was a 3-day-old coffee stain. Do you know what happens when a Tier 3 asset activates an emergency fail-safe? Do you know how rare that is? No one responded. She stepped closer. Mr. Stradling didn't walk into your jurisdiction by accident. He gave you 30 minutes to realize who you were dealing with. You failed. Mayors tried to recover. We were just doing our job. No, she cut him off. You did your version of it. And now we have to clean up. Nicholas walked into the main room, uncuffed. No one had seen who released him. He made eye contact with Nate, nodded once. Not gratitude, not approval, just understanding. Then he turned to the agents. I assume the car's running, he said. The woman smiled for the first time. Of course, sir. And they left. Nobody said a word. Not even Myers, not anymore. Nicholas Stradling had disappeared through the doors, just as quietly as he had arrived, leaving behind an entire station full of questions, and not a single one answered. The car was silent. No music, no radio chatter, no idle conversation, just the soft hum of tires on asphalt and the occasional sigh of suspension shifting under the weight of decisions made decades ago. Nicholas Stradling sat in the back seat, hands folded over his lap, eyes staring not out the window but through it. He wasn't watching the city pass. He was remembering the other times he'd been in cars like this, when his name didn't just mean something, it meant consequences. Agent Lisa Trammell glanced at him through the rearview mirror. She hadn't asked him any questions since picking him up, not because she didn't want to, because she knew better. The man sitting in the back seat once trained the trainers. Nicholas Stradling was part of the architecture of operations that weren't even declassified yet. A phantom in a war no one would ever publicly admit had happened. I have the file, the man in the passenger seat said, finally breaking the silence. He held up a slim, charcoal-gray folder with no markings, not even a label. Nicholas's eyes flicked to it, then back to the glass. You brought the long version? The man swallowed, nodding. I asked for the quiet version, Nicholas said. Not angry, just disappointed. Lisa spoke up. You activated an emergency protocol with a 6-digit PIN we buried beneath 3 fail-safes. That brought up more than your last ops report, sir. It triggered a full scan on every name, alias, location, and stored asset tied to you. The system didn't know whether it was a drill or the beginning of something larger. It's not the beginning, Nicholas replied. It's the end of a thread that should have been burned a long time ago. Lisa gave a tight nod. Then we need to know why a Tier 3 black tier veteran walked into a local bank branch and let himself get arrested. Nicholas didn't answer right away. His fingers tapped once against his knee. 1, 2, 3 beats. Then stillness. I was testing something, he said finally. Lisa raised an eyebrow in the mirror. Testing? Greg Tanner's assistant branch manager, new name, new face, same signature, Nicholas murmured. He was attached to Operation Byline under the name Adam Vole. Back when Patriot Federal wasn't a bank, it was a shell for war zone fund routing. Lisa straightened in her seat. That was a decade ago. That operation was supposed to be scrubbed. We pulled all the handlers, didn't we? We thought we did, Nicholas said, but someone started reactivating identities, and not for intelligence, for profit. The man in the passenger seat, Paul, from Cyberfield, shifted nervously. If he's Adam Vole, he's supposed to be dead. The car bomb in Aleppo? Confirmed remains. Nicholas finally looked at him. That's what we were told, he said. Lisa took the next turn fast, gripping the wheel tighter. Why didn't you report this through the division? I did, Nicholas replied. 6 weeks ago. 3 times. No response. Silence filled the car like rising smoke. Paul checked his phone. That's not possible. All black-level transmissions route to Vault Echo. Nicholas held up a small chip the size of a fingernail. This is what I pulled from my own report locker. The logs were wiped. Every trace of my inquiry was rerouted, not deleted, redirected, like someone's watching the watchers. Lisa's jaw clenched. You let yourself get arrested to draw attention to it. Correct, Nicholas said. Because when I walk into a bank and get cuffed, you'll send someone. You always did. They drove in silence for a moment longer, then Lisa spoke. Where are we going? My place, Nicholas said. I have the rest there, files, footage, names. You'll want to sit down for it. When they arrived, it wasn't what Paul expected. He thought it would be some bunker, some fortress of old spycraft and surveillance, but it was a brownstone on the edge of the city, clean, quiet, bookshelves, a coat rack, a cat curled up on the windowsill. Nicholas walked in without hesitation, gesturing them to follow. Take off your shoes. Floors are oak. Lisa blinked. You live like this? I live like I earned peace, Nicholas replied, even if it doesn't last. He moved to a cabinet in the back room, opened it, and slid out a hidden panel. Inside was a locked briefcase. Retinal scanner. Nicholas leaned forward, a quiet click sounding as the case recognized him and hissed open. Inside were folders, physical, not digital. No hard drives, no USBs, just printed paper, Polaroids, and old-style negatives in archival sleeves. Lisa stepped forward and stared. Paul didn't move. He knew he shouldn't. This can't be real, she said under her breath. Nicholas handed her the top file. That's Tanner's, or Vole. You'll see the biometric match on page 6. He went dark after Aleppo, then shows up managing a small branch in Arizona 5 years later under a civilian alias. No background, no hiring trail. But that's not the problem. He handed her another file. That is. Lisa flipped it open, her brow furrowed. These are transfers, but not in dollars. These are crypto chain logs. Nicholas nodded. Routing untraceable funds through veteran charities. Most don't even know their names are being used. The bank is the cover. Paul finally stepped forward, mouth slightly open. This is treason. This isn't just embezzlement. This is the kind of routing we used during destabilization campaigns. Nicholas looked at him, dead serious. Exactly. Lisa sat down. Hard. So, he's laundering ops cash through fake non-profit fronts disguised as vet orgs, and no one noticed? People noticed, Nicholas said. They were removed, quietly, or silenced. And you let him arrest you to smoke it out? Nicholas leaned back in his armchair. No, I let him arrest me to force someone to care. Lisa shook her head, overwhelmed. Why didn't you run this up to Barrett? I didn't know if she was clean. Not after she started expanding Patriot's operations into that many international territories. Too fast, too quiet. Elaine Barrett is the CEO, Paul said. She is Patriot. Nicholas said nothing. Lisa narrowed her eyes. You think she's part of it? I think, Nicholas said carefully, she needs to answer some questions. Paul looked between them. If this is true, then we're not just talking about a few rogue managers. We're talking about the agency being compromised by its own financial shell. Or worse, Nicholas said. Used to build one. Lisa stood up. We need to secure this house. Right now. No signals in or out. Nicholas turned toward the bookshelf, then slowly pulled a photo from behind a row of novels. In it, he stood next to a woman in a military uniform, younger, smiling. Elaine Barrett. I trained her, Nicholas said quietly. Before she ever picked up a spreadsheet, she picked up a rifle. Lisa's voice was almost a whisper. So what happens next? Nicholas looked out the window. Now, he said, now we find out if the people we used to trust are still worth trusting. And far beyond the walls of that quiet brownstone, far past the noise of a city that didn't know what it was sitting on top of, a series of digital signals began to blink red. Protocols, firewalls, names. Someone else was watching, too. And they weren't happy. Nicholas sat in silence while Lisa and Paul reviewed the documents for a second time. They weren't flipping pages now, just staring, absorbing. processing the implications with the weight they deserved. Outside, the last of the late afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the floor. Inside, the quiet tension thickened with every second that passed. It was no longer about belief. It was about realization. "So, that's why you picked that bank branch?" Lisa finally said. Her voice was thin, not with fear, but with something older, betrayal. "Because you knew he was there?" Nicholas gave a single nod. "Greg Tanner's wasn't just a coincidence. I've been following him for 9 months. He's the weak link in a very strong chain." Paul let out a breath and rubbed the back of his neck. "Weak link, maybe. But if the chain goes where I think it does, it's wrapped around a lot of necks. And they're not amateurs." Nicholas turned toward the window, eyes scanning the street below. "That's the problem. They're not amateurs. They're ours. Or they used to be." Lisa stood, restless. She crossed the room to a second file Nicholas hadn't yet opened. She slid it toward him. "This one. You haven't explained this name." Nicholas didn't answer. Instead, he rose from his chair and walked to the kitchen. He opened a cabinet above the stove and pulled out a tin can with no label. Inside, nested within a hollowed-out metal core, was an old photo. He placed it on the table next to the unopened file. Lisa leaned in. Paul stepped closer. The photo showed a man and a woman standing at a remote airfield, early 2000s. The man wore desert fatigues. The woman wore civilian clothes but had a hardened, alert posture, smiling, unaware of the camera. Paul frowned. "That's Elaine Barrett." Nicholas nodded once. "And that," he said, tapping the man's image, "is the name you just asked about." Lisa opened the file. The name at the top of the sheet made her heart pause. Colin Thorne. She'd heard it before, but never on the record. Never on any file that actually existed. "That's not possible," she whispered. "It's more than possible," Nicholas said. "It's confirmed." Paul stared. Colin Thorne was part of the Berlin burn-off program. Didn't he disappear after the Prague debrief? "No," Nicholas said quietly. "He disappeared when we made him disappear. Paper trail said suicide in Montenegro, body cremated. But I've been getting breadcrumbs since 2017, little flags no one else noticed. Until this year." Lisa shook her head, but slowly, like she wanted to disagree but couldn't anymore. "He's supposed to be dead? You're saying not only is he alive, he's part of this?" Nicholas walked back to the table and placed a thumb drive between them. "That's his voice, 6 weeks ago. On a secure call routed through Patriot Federal's own server in Luxembourg." Paul reached for it, but Nicholas stopped him. "Not here." Lisa grabbed her coat. "We take it back to the field node." Nicholas didn't move. "What?" she asked. He looked at her carefully. "I need to know something first, off the record." Lisa folded her arms. "Go on." "Who brought Barrett in to lead Patriot?" Lisa glanced at Paul, then back at Nicholas. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting," Nicholas said slowly, "that if we're dealing with Colin Thorne, we're not just chasing financial corruption. We're tracking a shadow command that may predate the last 3 directors. And Barrett didn't rise through business. She was placed." Paul looked stunned. "Placed by who?" Nicholas didn't answer. Instead, he turned to Lisa. "You tell me." She didn't reply, not right away, because she didn't know. Or worse, she did and had buried it. Nicholas nodded grimly. "That's what I thought." They left the brownstone together, but in silence, not speaking again until they were halfway across the city, winding down into a secure underground lot below a private tech firm that served as a CIA field node. No sign, no guards out front, just cameras. So many that the average person wouldn't spot even one. Inside, Nicholas led them to a server room through a retinal scanner and palm code lock he hadn't touched in nearly a decade. The fact that it still recognized him didn't comfort him. It confirmed his fear. His clearances had never been revoked. That meant someone still wanted him active. He slid the drive into a port, Lisa and Paul stood behind him, watching as the screen lit up. The audio was old-school compressed, not studio clear but raw and real. The funds need to move through the Brazilian arm by the 15th. The veterans transfer gives us optics, then push the real batch through Cayman before end-of-quarter cleanup. The board will confirm at the Geneva meeting. Nicholas paused. "The voice," he said. "That's Colin Thorin." Paul shook his head. "It's deep-fake quality. If you didn't know him, it could be anyone." "I trained him," Nicholas said. "You think I don't know his vocal tics? He bites syllables when he's nervous, swallows the end of quarter every time he's overreaching. That's him." Lisa said nothing. She was still staring at the screen, her face slowly draining of color. "Wait, back it up. Geneva meeting?" Nicholas rewound. "Board will confirm at the Geneva meeting." Lisa turned to Paul. "Didn't Barrett announce she was flying to Geneva next week for the Global Compliance Conference?" Paul nodded slowly. "Yeah, but the company's not even on the speaker list. We thought it was a PR stunt." "It's not," Nicholas said. "It's a board meeting." Lisa took a step back, her breath shallow. "What kind of board meets off record in Geneva, using laundered veterans' aid as cover?" "The kind," Nicholas said, "has been moving black capital since 2003. Paul was pacing now. Okay, so let's say Thorne's alive. Let's say Barrett's connected. What's the play? Why move this money now? Why risk exposure after 20 years of silence? Nicholas stared at the monitor. Because something bigger is coming, and they need liquid assets, off-grid. Lisa narrowed her eyes. You're thinking insurgency? I'm thinking insurance, Nicholas said. The kind you only cash in when you know the system's about to collapse. Paul sat down slowly. So, this isn't about money laundering. It's about post-federal infrastructure. They're building a new system. Nicholas nodded. And they're using us to do it. Lisa turned away, her fists clenched. How the hell do we stop something that's been operating longer than most of us had been cleared? Nicholas looked over his shoulder. His voice was low but sharp. We don't take it down all at once. We break one link. We expose one name. Whose? Paul asked. Nicholas turned back to the screen, then to Lisa. Yours, he said. She stiffened. Excuse me? Not because you're dirty, Nicholas said. Because they know you're not. You're still a believer. You've kept your hands clean, and they think that makes you predictable. Lisa's eyes burned. And you're saying we make me unpredictable. We let you get close, Nicholas said. We let them think they've turned you. You'll be our inside line to the Geneva summit. Paul shook his head. That's suicide. No, Nicholas replied. That's leverage. Lisa stared at him, then nodded. Not fast, not eager, but solid. Then we'd better make sure the next time they drop a name, she said. It's not ours. Nicholas smiled, a hard, tired smile. That's the spirit, he said. Now, let's go raise some hell. The air in Geneva had that expensive stillness that only old money could afford. Clean streets, clean suits, clean lies. Lisa Trammell stepped out of the town car in a slate-gray blazer that hugged her frame like a tailored threat, high heels clicking like a clock running out of time. No agents, no backup, just her and a secure case cuffed to her wrist that made the doorman at the Hotel du Parle Exchange step aside without question. Inside, the lobby glittered with marble and the low hum of quiet power. Executives drifted like sharks in silk, sipping from crystal glasses and murmuring in 6 languages. This wasn't a conference, this was theater, and the script had been written in classified ink. Lisa passed through 2 checkpoints before she even reached the lift. She offered no ID, just a chip scan from the ring on her index finger. It pinged green. She was expected. On the 42nd floor, the air got colder. The room she entered was minimalist to the point of menace. White walls, black glass, a table with 7 chairs and no windows. They didn't need a view. They were the view. Elaine Barrett sat at the head of the table, perfectly still. Her posture was flawless. her eyes unreadable. "Director Trammell," she said smoothly. "Welcome." Lisa didn't smile. "CEO Barrett?" Elaine gestured to the seat at her right. "You're early." "I prefer to walk into the room before the smoke settles," Lisa replied. A flicker of something passed through Elaine's eyes. Approval, maybe. Or calculation. Two other attendees were already seated. One was a Saudi investor with ties to 4 sovereign wealth funds. The other was a Dutch banker with shell companies spiderwebbed across the Caribbean. Neither looked at Lisa, not directly, but they noticed her. They always notice the one who might not belong. The door opened again. Colin Thorne entered. Lisa had seen photos, heard recordings, but the real thing was different, more casual, leaner, like a man who'd spent the last decade living in plain sight. He wore a charcoal turtleneck under a midnight blue coat, no tie, no badge, just presence. When he saw Lisa, he paused. His eyes locked on hers, and for a moment the world contracted. "New face," he said, voice soft but clear. "Interesting." Elaine's tone was smooth butter over steel. "Colin, this is Director Trammell from the States. She's agreed to consult." Colin raised an eyebrow. "Consult? On what?" "Anna," Lisa said. There was a pause, then a chuckle from Colin as he moved to his seat across the table. "I like her already," he said.
Lisa placed the case on the table, entered a code, opened it. Inside, a slim tablet and 3 sealed documents. "The agency wants transparency. They're getting nervous. Too many eyes are noticing veteran-linked funds tied to alt sets. If we don't provide oversight, someone else will." Colin leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "And you're here to be the canary or the cat?" Lisa met his gaze without flinching. "I'm here to find out which one of you plans to collapse the mine." Elaine raised a hand, ending the volley. "Enough! This isn't a sparring match."
Another attendee entered, a Russian oligarch. 2 minutes later, someone from the Chinese tech sector. The board was forming. The summit had begun. Lisa watched them take their seats, noting who didn't shake hands, who nodded curtly, who avoided eye contact altogether. This wasn't a coalition, it was a conspiracy, built on temporary alignment and long-term insurance. Elaine opened the meeting without preamble. "You all know why you're here. The Geneva Protocol must be finalized before the transition quarter. The structure is set, the only variable left, optics." She turned to Lisa. "That's your domain." Lisa tapped the tablet. A screen behind her came to life with figures, flowcharts, and laundering trails disguised as charity initiatives. Public sentiment is fragile. Post-war fatigue, government skepticism. If you want to move $9 billion through non-government channels using foundations and memorial grants, you need a cause the public won't question. She tapped again. Up came images. Flag-draped coffins, folded triangle flags, wounded veterans in rehab. "Veterans," she said, "you wrap this scheme in the flag. No one looks too closely." Collins smirked. "And you're just giving us this intel?" "No," Lisa replied. "I'm selling it." Elaine narrowed her eyes slightly. "Selling? You want plausible deniability, you want distance, you want someone to give this the illusion of oversight while keeping the press and foreign monitors at bay. That's not free, not anymore." Colin tilted his head. "And what's your price?" Lisa reached into the case and pulled out a thin black card. She slid it across the table toward Elaine. "Access. Level 4 vault. Zurich node. I want everything tied to Project Cobalt off the books and in my control." Colin's face finally changed. Just a flicker. "You know about Cobalt?" he said quietly.
Lisa looked at him. "I know enough to ask for it." Elaine didn't touch the card, but she didn't push it back either. "You're proposing we give you control of our deepest contingency plan in exchange for your loyalty?" "No," Lisa said. "In exchange for your survival." The room fell quiet. Even the machines seemed to pause. Colin stood slowly. walked around the table behind Lisa. Tell me something, he said, voice low. What happens if we say no? Lisa smiled. You get exposed. He laughed. By who? You? No, she replied. By him. Colin froze. Elaine's eyes sharpened. What did you say? Lisa pressed a button on the tablet. A second screen lit up, a video feed. Nicholas Stradling, sitting calmly in a secure room, hands folded, watching them. Hello, Colin, Nicholas said. Long time. Colin's composure cracked, just a little. You're bluffing, he said. Nicholas raised one brow. I've never bluffed a day in my life. Elaine leaned forward. Where are you transmitting from? Nicholas answered calmly. From inside the backup hub your tech teams thought was purged in 2016. You missed a server. Rookie mistake. Lisa stood. We've been recording this meeting since minute 3. Every face, every file, every lie. You think you're off grid. You're not even off watch. Elaine's mask slipped. You set this up. Lisa nodded. From the moment you had Nicholas arrested. Colin turned to Elaine. Shut it down. Elaine tried. She reached for her control console. It blinked red. Access denied. Nicholas's voice came again, calm and clear. You built your empire on silence, on secrets, but you forgot something. Colin sneered. What's that? Nicholas leaned closer to the camera. Some of us remember everything. The feed cut. A second later, the power in the building flickered. Doors locked, phones buzzed and died. Paul's voice came through Lisa's earpiece, crisp and confident. Package secured, agencies inbound, we've got eyes on every exit. Lisa looked around the room. Elaine stood, Colin stayed seated, his expression darkening by the second. Lisa lifted her chin. This is what happens when you arrest the wrong veteran. And then she walked out, leaving the architects of shadow scrambling in the light.
The chopper blades sliced through the sky over Virginia, banking low over the tree line before settling into a slow descent. A landing pad waited below, ringed with blue lights and guarded not by men with rifles, but by those with clipboards and earpieces, eyes sharp and shoulders squared. The emblem beneath the chopper wheels wasn't military, but it might as well have been. These weren't soldiers in uniform. They were the ones who whispered orders that moved nations.
Nicholas Stradling stepped out of the bird without fanfare. He didn't need it. The man didn't radiate power like a politician or swagger like a general. He moved like a man who had already done the work, who had made peace with every war he fought, and had finally, after all this time, seen the enemy exposed. Lisa was waiting for him at the edge of the pad. She didn't salute. She didn't speak. She just handed him a sealed envelope. They flipped 6 of the board, she said. 3 more fled. Barrett's in holding. Thorne disappeared in the confusion, but we've got his scent. Nicholas nodded, opening the envelope. Inside were documents, signed orders. A formal statement acknowledging that Operation Cobalt had been dismantled, the money rerouted, the shell charities shut down, more than a dozen whistleblower protections activated and declassified overnight. The agency wants to brief you privately, Lisa added. He tucked the envelope into his coat. The agency already had their chance to listen. Lisa smirked. That's what I told them. They walked in silence toward the main building, a low, modern structure tucked into the landscape, almost pretending to be just another corporate campus. Inside, the hallway stretched clean and quiet, sterile but not unwelcoming. As they passed through the final checkpoint, Paul met them at the door. You made the news, he said. Nicholas stopped. I don't watch it. Well, Paul said, pulling out his phone, you might want to this time. He tapped the screen. The headline read,
CIA veteran exposes billion-dollar global laundering ring. Whistleblower investigation expands. Below it, a grainy still of Nicholas at the Geneva feed, eyes locked on the camera. He didn't flinch at the image. He didn't smirk or scowl. He just stared at it like an old ghost finally laid to rest. You're a hero, Paul said. Nicholas turned. No, I'm a witness. That's different. They entered a smaller room now, warmly lit with a long wooden table and chairs that didn't squeak. Waiting there was someone Nicholas hadn't seen in decades. General Ellis, retired, long since out of the game, but still sharp, still dangerous. The old man stood slowly and extended his hand. Hell of a mess you cleaned up. Nicholas shook his hand. Someone had to. You should have been wearing stars, you know. Nicola smiled faintly. I didn't like the shine.
They sat. Tea was poured, files passed back and forth. Lisa stood to the side, arms crossed, while Paul sat near the back, still awed by the presence in the room. The general leaned forward. So, what do you want now? Medals, honors, parade? Nicholas chuckled. A porch, a chair, and a dog that listens when I tell it to sit. The general grinned. We can do better than that. Lisa cleared her throat. Actually, there's one more thing. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a single manila folder. Inside was a certificate, sealed, signed, and framed beneath bulletproof glass. Nicholas blinked. It was his discharge upgrade. Your record's been cleared, she said, fully reinstated. All citations recognized, all honors restored. Nicholas stared at the paper for a long time. His jaw tightened, just once. Then relaxed. They finally fixed it, he said quietly. Lisa nodded. Took 'em long enough? He reached out and touched the edge of the glass. My wife wrote a dozen letters about this, he murmured. She didn't live long enough to see it corrected. Lisa hesitated. Then softly, but she knew it was worth correcting. Nicolas nodded. She did. Paul stepped forward, hesitant. So what happens next? I mean, with the rest of the people involved? Lisa answered, Interpol has warrants, the UN is reviewing emergency oversight resolutions, half the security world is scrambling to figure out how deep this went. And Thorne? She met Nicholas's gaze. We'll find him. He nodded once. That was enough. Later that night, Nicholas returned to his brownstone. The lights had been turned back on, the rooms still exactly as he left them. Books lined the shelves, a record player sat quiet in the corner. He poured himself a glass of bourbon and sat on the porch as the sun disappeared behind the rooftops. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the weight on his chest. Just as he took a sip, the gate creaked open. A boy, 8, maybe 9, stood awkwardly holding a folded flag under his arm. His mother stood a few steps behind him. You, Mr. Stradling? The boy asked. Nicholas stood. Yes, I am. My grandpa said you saved his unit. Said you pulled him out after the chopper crashed. He always talked about the man with the scar on his wrist and the steady hands. Nicholas glanced down at the wrist the boy was pointing at. The scar, faint but still there. What's your grandfather's name? He asked. Calvin Brooks, the boy said. Nicholas closed his eyes. The name hit him like a soft punch to the heart. He made it home, he said, his voice just above a whisper. The boy nodded. He passed last year, but he said if I ever met you, I should give you this. The boy held out the flag. Nicholas took it slowly, reverently. He said it was the only thing that ever kept him steady when he shook. Nicholas knelt down and looked the boy in the eye. You keep shaking, he said gently. That's how you know you still care. The boy didn't fully understand, but he nodded anyway. His mother gave Nicholas a grateful smile before guiding him back through the gate. Nicholas watched them go, then unfolded the flag in his lap. Inside was a note written in faded ink. If you're reading this, then I finally kept my promise. See you on the high ground. Nicholas looked up at the stars as they began to appear, one by one, like old friends coming home. He raised the flag once, in silent salute. And for the first time in a long, long time, he smiled.
2 weeks passed, but the echoes of what happened in the city reverberated far beyond the boundaries of its concrete blocks and rusted bridges. The name Walter Jackson became more than a trending headline. It became a movement. The phrase, "Stand tall like Walt," had started as a social media caption and grew into a citywide campaign. Graffiti artists sprayed murals of Walt's face on boarded-up walls. Elementary school kids sent thank you cards to his address. Churches held candlelight vigils, not just for him, but for all the veterans still waiting to be seen. On the local news, new footage aired daily. Interviews with people whose lives Walt had touched without ever knowing it. A teacher who used to ride his bus every morning in high school. A man who, years ago, tried to rob a corner store but changed his mind because Walt saw him walking out with the weapon and simply nodded, like he knew he was better than that. And every time the anchor finished another story, there was a silent pause. A moment to let it sink in. Walter wasn't just a man anymore. It was a mirror, and everyone was staring into it. City Council passed an emergency resolution banning further police contracts with private military firms. Vanguard Shield's license to operate in the city was officially revoked. Federal investigations were underway. Whistleblowers, once silent, came forward in droves, shielded now by community, by public pressure, and by the undeniable evidence broadcast across every device in the country. Captain Holloway had resigned. He didn't do it at a press conference. He did it behind closed doors, forced by the mayor and several state officials who'd flown in unannounced after the footage aired. There was no ceremony, no handshake, just a cold signature and a terse escort out of the building. Murdoch was in custody. Formal charges filed. Aggravated assault. Civil rights violations. Tampering with evidence. His lawyer tried to plead down the case, but the city wasn't buying it, not this time. The DA, once hesitant to challenge anyone connected to Holloway, now stood firmly with the people. Her office had changed, too, and Dana Rivas was officially reinstated, promoted, and reassigned to lead the precinct's newly formed Civil Accountability Unit. She didn't smile much when it was announced, but later, when she visited Walt's home with flowers and a sealed commendation envelope, she sat beside him on the porch and said, "You reminded me why I put this badge on." He nodded. "I knew that already," he said. The two of them sat there in companionable quiet, the kind that comes only after fire has passed, and the smoke has begun to clear. Caleb watched from across the street, his arms folded, eyes soft. He hadn't gone back into hiding, not yet, but he didn't stay still either. That wasn't in him. He had become something else now. Not just a ghost, not just a weapon. He had become a guide. He trained in his group in nonviolent resistance techniques, counter-surveillance strategies, and peaceful demonstration protocols. He built connections with veterans organizations, security experts, and journalists. And he never stopped watching. When he and Walt finally sat together alone, there was no dramatic reunion. Just a small wooden table on Walt's back patio, 2 mugs of black coffee, the sun warming their faces, and silence. Until Caleb finally broke it. "I should have come back sooner." Walt took a sip of coffee, then a breath. "I wasn't ready to see you until you were ready to come back. I thought I had to protect you by staying away." "You did," Walt said, without a hint of resentment. "But then you realized protecting someone doesn't always mean disappearing. Sometimes it means standing beside them, even if you're still figuring out who you are." Caleb looked away, blinking hard. Walt leaned forward. "You know what I saw the day you left for selection training?" "What?" "A boy carrying the weight of men who hadn't earned it." Caleb met his father's eyes. "And now I see a man who finally gave that weight back to the people who should have carried it all along." Caleb's hands trembled slightly on the mug. Walt reached across the table and put his weathered palm over his son's. "I'm proud of you," he said. "I always was." Caleb didn't speak, but his grip tightened just enough to say what words never could. Later that week, a citywide Veteran Appreciation Day was held. Unplanned, unbudgeted, but unstoppable. Local business owners volunteered space. School bands played in unison from different districts. Children sang the national anthem in front of murals depicting veterans of all backgrounds, all eras. Walter Jackson was the honorary Grand Marshal. He didn't want a parade, but they gave him one anyway. Not with floats or confetti, but with rows of people standing, saluting, cheering, with hands on hearts and tears in eyes, with silence when he passed. Not because they were told to, but because they felt it. He wore his old bus driver's jacket, not his uniform, not his medals. And when someone asked why, he said, "Because the job I did after the war taught me more about this country than the war ever did." Melanie Parker aired a follow-up documentary, The Stand, charting the entire sequence of events from the moment Walt told that man to get off his bus all the way to the systemic reckoning that followed. It garnered national attention, awards. More importantly, it inspired legislation in neighboring cities to audit their own private security contracts. Nena went on to co-author a book about youth-led community justice movements. Dana helped create an internal police curriculum now taught to every new recruit in the city. And Rico? Rico was hired by the city's new independent tech ethics board. He never stopped wearing oil-stained overalls, but now he wore a badge that said Systems Watchdog. He loved the irony. As for Caleb, he left again. But this time he left with purpose. Not to run, not to hide, but to teach. He began hosting covert seminars for veterans struggling to reintegrate, teaching them tactical discipline not for combat, but for survival in a world that often failed them. And every once in a while, a letter would show up in Walt's mailbox. No return address, no name, just a single line. "Still watching? Still with you?" Walt never needed more than that, because he knew, and for the first time in a long time, he could sleep without locking the deadbolt, without keeping his boots beside the bed, without bracing for the world to take something from him again. He had already given enough. And finally the world gave something back.